It's been a while since I've seen a Spyderco that I think has a solid design. And what I mean by that is there's a clear purpose for the product. Lots of knives out there are, for their artistry, and there's nothing wrong with collecting functional art. But this review is based on someone that looks at the profile of the blade, the grinds, the materials used, in terms of how it affects, the overall purpose of the knife. Spyderco has been focusing on, mini collaboration knives. But so far, still nothing, in my opinion, is built the way the Spyderco Paramilitary 2 and the Sage 2 are in terms of just how functional they are. The last knife I think was built with a clear intention, but the deployment needs some redesign, was the Yojimbo 2. The Techno's okay. I mean, I got one of these double bevels here, and this doesn't really make so much sense. You have a thicker blade grind in the belly, so you still have a thin tip. Usually you would do that so you could reinforce the tip. The Chalkway is really great. I'm looking forward to reviewing the Chalkway. I think this one is one of my top. And you can see it's easy to deploy. You're getting a lot of knife for a thin, compact, lightweight package. You have the solid construction. You have 3 screws, all similar in size. You can see it's even machined out. Full flat grind, thin blade, straight edge. They raised the tip up a little bit so it got a little bit, so it's not such a weak point. Easy to deploy. I mean, this is a good knife. So if you guys remember though, way back when I first started, I tested the Spyderco Lamtanto, and that's still one of the best knives I feel Spyderco has made. It was made in Seiki City, just like the Karahawk is. But if you remember the construction, even though it was really strong in my testing, it had a lot of tolerance issues when I tried to reassemble it. Now, in my opinion, from experience as a dealer and reviewer, most of the Seiki City knives don't really have, I would say, like good engineering. Meaning, for example, I can disassemble my Paramilitary 2, put it back together, no problem. There's no gaps formed, I can get the blade centered. Same thing with the Sage 2, and I'm pretty sure same thing with the Chalkway. The thing here is that, if you remember on the Lamtanto, and also here this Karahawk, you have these sort of 4 thin pieces of material held together by small screws. Even here, you can see there's a gap when I reassembled it. You can see right there, it's uneven. There is a gap right there, and you see it's mainly actually because there's nothing here to hold it up together. I mean, if I just press, it's fine. Now, backlocks can be challenging to reassemble, but I feel there's a simple trick I can show you. Usually, steel liners and Spydercos have decent stain resistance, but most production knives you're not going to get. For example, if the blade is VG10, they're not going to give you also VG10 liners, and that would be optimal. But you're still going to possibly have to clean the knife. Rust can form. I mean, you don't have much. I mean, there's not really an open construction here, so if that happens, you can see the screws here they're durable. You don't have to really worry about taking apart these screws and having them get damaged. One side is female, so you have 4 female screws in the body, the males on this side, and then the pivot. The female screws are slotted, meaning they're not perfectly cylindrical. They don't rotate in place. So you can see the screw it's slotted, so when you put them in there, they won't rotate. The liners have that slot. And you can see, well, actually look, there is rust on the lock bar already. Not so bad. These are stainless steel liners that are polished, so it looks like I can just kind of, I don't know. Looks like there's a scuffing there, so the rust has kind of got into it. Normally I would say you just wipe it off. Let's see. There's sort of some unevenness. It looks like pitting, and there's no possible way that in the time I've owned this knife it's had that issue already, but it looks like when they ground it, there's a little like damage there. Because usually if it's smooth, I should be able to just scrape it off like that. See? Because I mean, they should be polished to some degree. These stainless steel components should be slick enough to, but you can see there's still grind lines. So main thing is this: when you want to put together this knife, you can pretty much assemble the entire thing like this. Put everything together. The lock bar, if it slides out, it's right here. So the spring, I mean. So you just have to put the spring in, which on this one's very easy. You can actually see it and it slides right in, drops in, no problem. One more time. So just that, and then drops in. And then you just have to put the lock bar in last. That's kind of the trick to a back lock. Get the lock bar in last. You know, have everything kind of stable and steady and already connected, and then put the female in for the lock bar. So right now we have the female in place. You just have to get the hole lined up. There we go. And then you can just push it in. So it's not so bad. Get the blade all situated, get the the washers. That probably has a lot of stuff going on. So screw the pivot down, get the blade in place, and then move on to the backspacer. Get 1 screw, 2 screws in, and then finally do the lock bar. The blade steel is VG10, which is fantastic for what the purpose is of the knife. It's softer, so it's going to be easier to sharpen and get the kind of the edge lined up. And you're not really going to chip it. It's more likely to be tough and just kind of roll. So that's good for functioning, especially for this type of blade shape, for ease of use for people. And lastly, the liners are skeletonized, which means that Spyderco has put an investment into this. So they're really hoping, I think, that this design is going to last and stick around. Now, where this knife gets bad, and in some ways really kind of ruins the knife, if you see on mine, I've stonewashed a little bit the basically the body metal parts, and that's because when you first get it, everything is very sharp. It's basically just flat ground, plain surfaced, and all these edges are very aggressive. Aggressive to the point where, like, if you pull out aggressively, it'll even cut into your finger and actually cut your skin. This is a really serious problem with this knife. If you intend to use it a lot, then that's going to it's going to become almost like unacceptable. Now let's look at, for example, me personally, I thought I could put a bevel on the inside of that ring. But I thought that would kind of change the look and it would take a lot of work. So instead what I just did is I sandpapered it. But then that kind of makes it a little scratchy, and I thought, I got a stone wash or a tumbler, let's give it a nice stone wash, which will also knock all the sharp edges off of all this. Like on Hinder, all the scales have some sanding, kind of rounded corners anyway, so you can see each individual kind of layer, and it's a nice look, and it's a little bit easier, so you don't have to have everything be perfect. But what happened is when I stonewashed it, it showed that, if you can see, this ring is not profiled like circular. It's not right. It's narrower here, kind of bubbles out here. You can actually feel it if you would run your finger. It's uneven. So when I stonewashed it, first of all, I kind of noticed that it was more noticeable. You can see how the light kind of rolls. See how it kind of drops down over here, because it's not perfectly smooth, flat on the surface. It actually drops a little bit along each sort of edge as it traveled, as the belt basically traveled over each spot. And basically what that means is, when you make a knife, part of the process for getting a good final product is finishing the material in a way that makes sense for the design. For example, stonewash to hide scratches. Bead blast not so good on steels that don't have a lot of chromium. Now the next challenge depends more on the time that the company or the maker is willing to spend, and obviously how much the customer is willing to pay, and also the tools required for that material. Now, giving a satin to stainless liners isn't really a lot of work. You basically just push it up against the belt, the flat plan, and you're done, which is what they did. But what happened here is they didn't use the proper belt. which is 30% more expensive. It basically has no flex. So the belt doesn't, when you push, doesn't sort of contour into the shape of the metal. Like, it doesn't do that. It'll just stay flat as you push. But what this happened is, the belt basically kind of dropped in and sunk into that area, sunk in over these two sides, and basically that happened all the way through. Now, why this matters is, say you ask someone to fix those sharp edges in the finger hole. If they added some bevels, the bevel's not going to be even because the surface is uneven. So you're going to have like a high, low, thick, thin bevel traveling around. And let's say then you stonewash also, you're not going to be able to make it look good because then you're going to see, for example, what I see on mine, which is this sort of uneven finger ring and sort of uneven surface too. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be at that level of precision, but that's how I make knives. And if this is not going to be as thorough as something that I could make, then for me, I have to kind of reevaluate my opinion and value I place on this knife. Now, each of these steps is sort of connected. How well they finish the liners is going to determine how much chance that rust is going to form, like how high of a polish they take it. The belt they use, how sharp those edges are. It's all connected. So even though, yes, stonewashing will and tumbling it will knock off the edges, what will happen is it'll reveal those kind of imperfections in each step. When I reassembled it, there were some tolerance issues. I got the blade centered by, same thing as Lum Tanto. I had to switch the female, and on these two, it's on the other side. And that helps the centering. But there's still that gap in the spine, and even up here you can see so I don't know if you can tell on camera, but like that backspacer is crooked. It's cut that way actually across. And then on the inside, you see a lot more rougher grind lines on the internal components of each lock piece, which then would also create more chance for rust. The Karambit folders are kind of a thing. I mean, this is probably Spyderco's long-term answer. It's very much like an Emerson or one of those Fox ones. Yeah, it's just done the Spyderco way. It's definitely thinner than the Emerson, of course. If you want one of those, but you trust Spyderco more as a company in terms of construction, then this one is good for you. I prefer the lock back for this type of knife over a liner lock because, a traditional liner lock, you just have a detent. So if, you're putting your hand in your pocket and you bump that, it comes open, it sucks. With this one, at least you have to constantly fight that tension, and it lasts for most of the length of it. It's definitely not a smooth feeling ever. I've been playing with it a lot, trying to see if it will wear. Eventually, I'm assuming that area that's kind of providing that tension will kind of smooth out and it'll be a little more quicker to deploy. This back lock is a better choice when you have a wave feature, especially one that's inward towards your pocket. Overall, a Karambit is a challenging knife to make. Any knife with lots of cutouts, even the holes inside, that's expensive because you're having to cut into it. Worse if the material is thick, because then I'll use up whatever saws or drill bits, it'll just wear them out. The steel can also make that more of an issue. Now, one of the toughest things is when there's a finger hole, because then that's sort of a noticeable shape. And, again, you can tell if it's uneven. And, they do their best. Everyone does their best. Now, this knife isn't made of any special materials. It's got thin liners, but even then, it's expensive for what it is, because remember, even with wire jet, you still have to get everything 90 degrees. So you can see they had to profile it, and that's where this kind of unevenness occurred. Because I'm pretty sure in drafting, this ring was a perfect circle. Is when that person profiled it and took this whatever tool they used to get in there, that they kind of pressed too hard right here. Now, in terms of performance, the wave feature is really nice, but I do prefer a normal position for carry, meaning if I was left hand like this, meaning the wave features facing away from me, not in towards my pocket. I'm going to insert a clip right now. I mean, it's hard enough deploying a folder under stress, but even more so trying to get your finger into a hole, especially if your pants are slightly baggy and it's moving around. I mean, realistically, if you're fighting with someone, you're not going to be stationary. And so that idea, for example, on my trifecta Karambit, I even ditched the idea because, for retention, there's other ways to get the knife to stay in your hand. But still, I think as a defensive tool, Karambits are nice, but the smaller ones are more just surface slashers. You lose reach. You're not getting specifically an outward reach there. You're just getting a kind of a slashing motion that's only available. You don't have a way to stab. And I think modern Tacno knives do much more with their profiles and grind. So the old reverse grip for deployment speed isn't really unique to the Karambit anymore. We have lots of interesting ways for a knife to be deployed. We have materials like Kydex. You can even gravity shake. Really, you're losing distance and piercing, but it is a traditional fighting knife. So if you like this sort of the techniques that go along with using this type of blade, you do like the idea of having some form of retention, like guaranteeing the knife will stay in your hand. Again, modern materials like Pleoply G10 have changed the definition of grip, but again, if you're just a fan, it's still better than nothing. Realistically, a can of Fox pepper spray is going to do more for you than trying to use your knife in a standing confrontation. For utility, it's actually a nice blade. It's not thick. You can see waves. Basically, it's unevenness over here also. They rushed it too much. It's not perfectly 90 all across the spine. You can see with the glare. Sorry, I see that, and so you see how the light travels over it. But it's good. It cuts food really well, and packaging, plants just fine. Now, that being said, the roll and application for this knife, I don't think it's a very good choice for EDC because it takes up the pocket. It makes carrying other objects in that same pocket not practical. Because when you put your hand in, you have to kind of avoid it. It depends on the size of your pockets, the size of your hands, but you're always hitting that wave, which is kind of painful. And you have to try to purposely, pay attention to that. It's hard to get, say, for example, a pair of keys sitting down here. In addition, when you do deploy it in public, say you're at the post office and you wave it open to cut a package, that scares people. So when you want to just casually deploy it, you have to kind of carefully pull it out of your pocket and try not to get the catch. It's not very quick and easy to do. Also, when you do wave, you kind of have to turn it into the lip of the pants. So when you deploy it, you kind of fling it to the side, which is, again, it's like this motion of you fling your arm out, and it's like you're trying to show everyone, basically. It's not that good. It makes that loud click also. Now, one interesting consideration for carrying it is in normal position. Now, for people who, the people who view Karambit fighting as, specifically it was a Karambit, compared to those who view it as the Jambia, or I can't pronounce it, but the Indonesian style of a claw knife, where they would hold this way. I think if you're going to carry it in this method, where it's like basically a cold steel and you have it, the pocket clip, since you do get a reversible pocket clip, this is a possibility. For example, let's say right hand carry, switch your pocket clip, put it in your pocket this way. When you wave it, you pull it back out towards your rear. This gives you, the use of your pocket then again. You can easily slide your hand in, pull stuff out. It's easier to pull the knife forward and out of your pocket without it waving. When you do pull out this way, you don't then have to really focus on getting your finger in the ring. You can kind of hold it like this. If your finger does kind of cross here, when the knife opens, it doesn't cut your finger because of the shape. So, I think that's more of a realistic way if you're going to use it for EDC to carry it this way in your pocket rather than this way facing towards the opponent. I neither recommend or don't recommend this knife. It's something obviously Spyderco is intending to keep around, if they can, and they've put significant investment into the design of it. Skeletonized liners kind of is the hint that they want to have it stay around, so they're going to make it even lighter, kind of put that little extra level of effort into it. Ultimately, this type of knife is both artistic and cultural, while also having, a mixture of modern goals built into it. Just be cautious of rust forming scenarios, so you don't have to take it apart constantly, unless you view this pricey knife purely as a tool and you don't care how it looks when you reassemble it and everything's a little bit off. Lastly, if you do intend to use it a lot for EDC, you're probably going to I don't know, I'm assuming you're gonna be bothered by those sharp edges. And you can either modify yourself, which is, it's not gonna look nice and clean, you know, without some decent knife making equipment and some really invested time into it.